Hi, everyone. Today we've got Evan Ackerman, who is the senior editor at IEEE Spectrum. And Evan collaborated with RoboHub in the past. So it's an honor to have you back, Evan.
I'm so happy to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about how people, especially researchers, can reach people like Evan who work in the media. And we'll also focus on how we can communicate in a fair way, trying to avoid hype. So, my first question for you, Ivan, is how should people approach you with a story?
I'm pretty easy to find, and I love talking to people about robots. In the past, I would have said, I try to go to a lot of conferences, so it's really great to meet up there and get kind of a face-to-face introduction. And obviously, that's not so much the case at the moment. But I'm on Twitter. My email is easy to find, and I'm just happy to kind of talk about potential stories. And um, yeah, so it's really not all that complicated. Just find me, reach out, and we can talk. Although I also want to say that I do talk to a lot of different people about a lot of different stuff, and it's as far as IEEE Spectrum of Box goes, it's pretty much just me. So I have a lot of stuff that a lot of people I'm talking to, a lot of things I'm working on, and it's difficult for me to write about everything. What's impossible for me to write about everything, and even stuff that I want to write about, sometimes I drop things accidentally or whatever. So I guess I would say three things. I'm easy to find and always happy to talk. um, I can't write about everything as much as I would want to, and sometimes I want to write about something and something else comes up, and I drop the ball. And so you should also feel free to just send me another email, and I will do my best to be like, I think this is great, but I'm super busy right now. Let me get back to you. Or, maybe I'll say, this sounds really interesting, but I don't think it's quite right for us, and here's why. Or I often also say, like, this looks great, but I don't think it would make a good article at this stage, but come back to me when you publish, the next paper on this, and then we can look through it again.
That's awesome. It's really helpful that you are so reachable. And today with social media, I guess it's easier to reach the media. And how should people go about describing what they've done?
I think the most important thing to think about when you're describing your own research is that rather than just presenting the data or presenting a result, you really want to find a way to tell a story. And part of that is my job, right? Like, I can help with that. But just the thing to think about is what, if you did an experiment or something, like not just the result of that experiment, but what is that saying more broadly? Like, why did you want to do this in the first place? What does it mean that you succeeded or that you didn't succeed? And what are the broader implications? It also, as far as storytelling goes, it definitely helps to have a video. I know that's not always possible with robotics research, but it is very helpful. And having, if you can't have a video, if you have some good pictures or something, that really helps, because it's something that when somebody reads through an article, you want them to have or be able to develop a picture in their mind to kind of go along with what they're reading. So it's not just about focusing attention or like getting attention at the top of an article. It's about helping people understand what that story is and kind of follow you through that story as you describe your research.
Absolutely. And apart from the questions that you mentioned previously, what questions do you usually ask the people who reach you?
Mhm. It can vary, of course, depending on what the research is about, but there are some common ones that I find myself asking frequently. So one is, where did this research come from? Like, is this based on someone else's research in your lab or your PI's research, or is it an interesting paper you saw and you wanted to follow up on it? Or did you just, wake up in the middle of the night and have this amazing idea for robotics research? So I like to hear about the background, both because it's kind of an interesting, a little bit of a personal connection, but also it's important to kind of call back to other research that came before you, right? And to have that continuity and properly contextualize what you're working on in robotics more broadly. So yeah, I ask, where did this idea come from? Related to that is like, why hasn't anyone else done this already? Like, what is, I guess, the special little magic thing that you've done that no one else has done before? And why hasn't anyone else done it before? Like, is it that it's been super hard, or you didn't have the right hardware didn't exist, or just nobody had thought of it? So that's also a really good question. And then of course, the obligatory one at the end is what are you working on next? And that is both a question about, what, where does your specific research go from here? Like, what is your next paper going to be? And it's also a broader question of, where is this research that you've just done, going to take you, and where is it going to take robotics in general? Like, how is this going to change things in the future?
I think it's super important that readers, or the people who receive the stories, just get the idea of the whole context around that unique piece of research, to understand the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great questions. And now, what tips would you give the researchers to answer your questions?
Yeah, the thing that I think, the piece of feedback I give the most when I ask people questions and they give me answers, is just that people often answer like, I'm a reviewer, or I'm their, advisor or something, and they will give highly technical, very specific answers. And that's information that's important as part of an answer, but you have to remember that we're not, like, IEEE Spectrum isn't publishing papers, right? We're publishing articles that we want people to read and enjoy. And as part of that, we really want kind of your personality. Like, we want you to be answering the questions in a way that you would if you were trying to describe this research to your friends or family. And part of that is just making it more accessible, right? We want people to be able to understand what you're talking about, but it's also like, we want your voice in the article as much as we can. We want people to be able to understand that there is a human or a team of humans doing this research, and they may be excited about different things about it, and that really helps the article be engaging when there's a little bit of that kind of human voice coming through. Other general tips, like, usually the questions we ask, we're not looking for like really specific technical detail. It's more like, we try to ask big picture questions, and we hope that they'll be answered in a big picture way, because again, the goal here is to have as many people as possible read and understand this article. And there are definitely people who are going to be looking for those really specific technical answers, but that's not most people, right? And if for the people who do want that, they can just go read the paper. So we're not looking for stuff that's in the paper. We want you to kind of be yeah, big picture and friendly, and try to avoid getting into the weeds on the detail. And the other thing too that we've talked about a little bit already is that it's a good idea to try and connect your research with things that people care about more broadly, like ideally beyond robotics, if that's possible. Because again, we want lots of people to be able to read about your research, even people who aren't necessarily in robotics, right? And in order for an article about robotics research to expand beyond the robotics community, it really needs to kind of make that broader connection. So even if you're speculating a little bit, that's totally fine. Just say, imagine one day this research I've done will be able to affect the whole world in this way. And of course, that gets into we don't want to hype it too much, or really hype it at all, but there's a difference between hype and just kind of encouraging people to imagine how robotics will affect them in the future.
And now that you mentioned hype, in your opinion, how can we all avoid hype when communicating a story?
A lot of avoiding hype, I think, that's a lot of that responsibility is on kind of me and other journalists, because we're the ones who tend to get caught up in that, because the simple fact is if you hype something, more people are going to read it. And that's something we try to be very careful of at Spectrum. And I know a lot of journalists try to be very careful of that, but it can be tricky because for us, like, again, we want these articles to go beyond just the robotics community, and finding a way to do that that isn't typing it can be difficult. And it's fine if it's difficult. It is a challenge for us. I enjoy that challenge, but just to say that it can be tricky to find the right way of describing research in a way that is exciting but isn't hyped. And so the approach that I try to use most of the time is just to be as honest and straightforward as possible, because oftentimes, like, robotics research is the truth of it is exciting enough that it sort of hypes itself, but it does so in a very reality-based way. So that's always great. And sometimes the robotics research can't hype itself without a little bit of help, in the sense that you as the researcher or me as the journalist need to figure out, okay, like, what is the bigger story here, right? Like, how does this affect more people than maybe immediately obvious? But then it's important to also, make sure that you are completely honest about what you're working on when you do that. And so, talking about, here's what doesn't work, here's why it doesn't work, here is why this is hard, here is all the times that we screwed up. And even if you feel like you don't want to share that stuff because it makes you look bad, it really doesn't make you look bad at all, because this is something that happens to everybody. Like, no one's research is flawless, and there's no reason to be embarrassed of stuff that you tried that didn't work. And oftentimes that'll be an explicit question I ask, like, what did you try that didn't work? And then what was the thing you tried that eventually did work? And that really helps damp down the hype, because then people who read the article understand, like, okay, this is a really hard thing and it doesn't work all the time. And it's amazing that it works now. So it's really, ultimately it's a positive.
I completely subscribe to that. I remember attending to conferences where this idea of creating a journal of failed trials. Uh, I
Yeah,
don't know if we'll see that in the future.
and researchers, a lot of researchers do that, right? It's just not public, but everybody hopefully keeps track of all of their experiments and everything that they do. They just only publish the good stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's kind of what you have to do. But you can publish the good stuff while still acknowledging and talking about all of the bad stuff that had to happen to get you there.
Absolutely. And speaking more broadly, how can researchers approach the general media?
So as we've talked about, when you start getting beyond the robotics specific media, which there isn't a lot of, frankly, I'm one of them. I'm always happy to write about robot stuff. But when you get beyond that, it becomes more important to think about that broader story. And it has to be not just a broader story for robotics, but a broader story for, technology or society, right? It can't just be that, I made this robot that's a little better than other robots before it. It has to be, here's this robot that I made, or this, this program that I designed, or whatever. And here is how it is going to change things in a way that even non-roboticists will really care about. And that's a bigger ask. Like, it's a harder story to tell, because a lot of robotics research, like, isn't there yet. And that's not to minimize the importance of this research. Like a lot of what we do in robotics is very incremental because a lot of the problems are very, very hard. So that's just something to consider, like when you're trying to expand that story, like to just figure out a way of saying like, okay, you know, this is why what I'm doing is important to my friends who aren't roboticists, or my family who has, you know, no idea what I'm actually working on. If I can tell a story and they'll be like, oh, okay, that's really cool. Like I can see how that could make my life better in some way in the future. Like that's kind of what you're looking for to expand to broader media. So it's difficult. It doesn't apply to all research. You should be prepared to spend kind of more time thinking about how to tell that story, and thinking about, you know, what kind of videos can I make? What kind of pictures can I share? So it's an investment. But the other thing I would say is, especially if you're looking at broader media, if you're at a university, you probably have a press office, and this is what they do, right? That they help you tell that story. They help you get the pictures in the video. They help make contact with journalists more broadly. So you've got people that'll help. And I would also say that, you know, oftentimes stories that you might not be thinking about as being appealing to a broader audience actually are. And talking to your press office or talking to your advisor is a great way to just figure out, like, what is the right context for me to be talking about this in? And, you know, it may end up being a great wider robotics story or a great kind of general media story or not. But there are people who have a lot of experience at this, and my guess is that they'll be happy to help.
Well, Ivan, thank you very, very much for your answers. And I think our audience here will have a lot of information to go on. And yeah, this is piece of gold. Thank you very much.
I'm always happy to help. And, you know, of course, I love writing about robotics, and I love talking to people about robotics. And I'm sorry that it hasn't been in person in a while, but you know, we're trying to keep up with it on our end through the virtual conferences and stuff. But again, you know, I'm as accessible as I can be, and so anyone is welcome to reach out, even if you don't have, even if you just have a question. Like I'm just happy to talk about, you know, or answer questions. So
at the end of the day, it's just humans speaking to humans. That's always nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for your time, Ivan, and hope to see you here again soon.
Thank you.